The ground gave way beneath Leo's boots with a sickening crunch. One moment, he was scrambling up the rocky hillside, mentally calculating how many more part-time shifts he'd need to cover next semester's tuition, trying to escape Professor Evans' latest tirade about his inadequate field notes. The next, he was sliding into darkness. Dust filled his lungs as he tumbled downward, the angry shouts from above fading into the sound of collapsing earth and his own panicked breathing. When the falling stopped, he found himself in absolute blackness, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. His phone's flashlight revealed a narrow corridor lined with crumbling plaster, strange geometric symbols painted along the walls in faded red pigment. At the end of the passage, a heavy iron door stood slightly ajar, its surface etched with markings that looked both ancient and entirely unfamiliar. From deep within the structure came a low groan of shifting metal, and a trickle of dirt rained down from the ceiling. This wasn't on any archaeological survey map. This was something buried, forgotten, and very unstable. Leo brushed concrete dust from his fraying jacket, his mind already calculating the consequences. Another failed field assignment would mean academic probation, and probation would mean losing his scholarship. He could already see the disappointment in his mother's eyes when he'd have to tell her he was coming back to the small town she'd sacrificed everything to help him leave. The maxed-out credit cards, the student loan statements piling up in his dorm room, the constant calculations of which meals he could skip to save money, all of it pressed down on him in that dark space. Professor Evans had just finished telling him his research methodology was uninspired and lacking in original thought, the latest in a series of criticisms that made Leo question whether he belonged in archaeology at all. He'd stormed off to clear his head, never expecting to literally stumble into what could either save his academic career or bury him alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very act of avoiding his failure might have led him to something extraordinary if he could only get out alive to tell anyone about it. As another section of ceiling collapsed nearby, Leo scrambled toward the iron door, his flashlight beam dancing wildly across strange symbols that seemed to tell a story he couldn't read. The door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, revealing a small chamber that smelled of old paper and ozone. In the center stood a metal desk bolted to the floor, its surface covered in a fine layer of dust that swirled in his light beam. And there, partially concealed beneath collapsed shelving, he saw it. A leather tube, cracked with age but still intact. His hands trembled as he carefully extracted the contents, unrolling a large sheet of what felt like vellum against the dusty desk. The map was unlike anything he'd ever seen in his studies. The cartography was precise, yet utterly alien, depicting landforms that didn't match any known geography, with waterways flowing in impossible patterns and mountain ranges where none should exist. The symbols matched those on the door and walls, a hybrid script that combined elements of ancient Sumerian cuneiform with something entirely unknown. His academic training warred with sheer wonder. This shouldn't exist, couldn't exist based on everything we knew about historical development. Yet here it was, trembling in his hands as the bunker continued to settle around him. The map was incomplete, torn along one edge as if part of a larger set, but what remained showed a route leading to a city depicted with towering spires and concentric circles, labeled with symbols that might mean source or origin. In that moment, surrounded by crumbling concrete and the weight of his own failing academic career, Leo held something that could rewrite history books. The question was whether he'd live long enough to understand what he'd found. Back in his cramped dorm room, Leo spread the fragile vellum across his desk, carefully weighting the corners with textbooks he could barely afford. The map seemed to hum with silent energy under the lamplight, its strange symbols taunting him with their secrecy. For 3 straight days, he moved between the university library's restricted archives and the ancient languages department, his life reduced to a blur of reference books and digital databases. He compared the symbols to every known writing system: Phoenician, Linear B, Indus Valley script, even obscure tribal markings from lost cultures. Nothing matched precisely, though he found eerie similarities in Mesopotamian accounting symbols and pre-Columbian directional markers. Professor Evans caught him poring over WWII bunker blueprints in the architecture library. "Still chasing fantasies, Moretti?" he'd said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Real archaeologists work with evidence, not student delusions. That bunker was cataloged in 1947. Empty." When Leo tried to show him a photograph of the symbols, Evans waved him away. "You're risking your academic standing with this nonsense. No one's going to fund a wild goose chase based on some faded graffiti." The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on the fourth day, when, sleep-deprived and surrounded by coffee cups, Leo noticed something he'd missed. The symbols weren't a single language, but a hybrid system: mathematical notation from ancient Babylon combined with architectural symbols from pre-Incan cultures and directional markers used by Polynesian navigators. It was as if someone had created a universal key using the most precise elements of multiple ancient knowledge systems. The coordinates, when he finally deciphered them, pointed to a remote section of the Amazon basin that didn't appear on modern maps, a region so dense with vegetation and uncharted terrain that satellite imagery showed only solid green. His heart sank as he calculated the costs. Even a basic expedition would require permits, local guides, specialized equipment, and air transport, tens of thousands of dollars he didn't have. The university would never fund something based on a student's theory, especially not when his academic standing was so precarious. For a desperate moment, he considered selling the map to a private collector, but the thought made him physically ill. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a piece of human history that deserved proper study. He stared at the coordinates glowing on his laptop screen, knowing they pointed toward either redemption or ruin, with no way to reach them. The email arrived at 2:17 a.m., its subject line stark and simple: "Regarding your discovery." Leo almost deleted it, assuming it was another phishing attempt or worse. Professor Evans checking up on him, but something made him open it. The message contained no greeting, no signature, just 3 sentences. "We know what you found. We can fund the expedition. Terms: absolute discretion, no questions asked." His blood ran cold. How could anyone know? He'd told no one, shown the map to no one except Professor Evans, who dismissed it entirely. For 3 days, he didn't respond, watching his inbox with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Then a second email arrived with a single attachment: a fully executed permit from the Brazilian government for archaeological research in precisely the coordinates he'd deciphered. The document looked authentic, complete with official seals and authorization codes he couldn't possibly have obtained himself. The sender had included a shipping tracking number and 2 words: "Equipment incoming." The package arrived 2 days later, a series of crates containing gear so advanced he'd only read about it in academic journals. Satellite phones with encrypted channels, LiDAR scanning equipment, climate controlled specimen containers, and a portable laboratory setup that must have cost more than his entire 4 years of tuition. There was no return address, no documentation, just perfectly organized professional expedition gear. Leo sat on the floor of his dorm room, surrounded by equipment he couldn't afford and didn't understand, holding a permit he hadn't requested. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, possibly illegal. Who funds a complete stranger's expedition without even meeting them? Who has the resources to obtain government permits overnight? But then he looked at the map still spread on his desk, at those impossible symbols pointing toward something that could redefine human history. This wasn't just about saving his academic career anymore. This was about answering a question no one had even thought to ask. The final email came with flight itineraries and coordinates for a landing strip in Manaus. Departure, 48 hours, decision final. He thought about deleting everything, reporting it to campus security, pretending none of this had happened. He could still salvage his degree, maybe transfer to another program. But as he stared at the ancient vellum, he realized some discoveries choose you as much as you choose them. At 3 a.m., with his hand trembling slightly, he typed a single word in reply: accepted. The response was immediate. Smart choice. Welcome to the truth. The Cessna descended through clouds that clung to the Amazon like thick cotton, the world below shifting from blue sky to an unbroken sea of green. Leo gripped his seat as the small plane bounced through turbulence, his stomach lurching with each drop. Through the scratched window, he watched the rainforest stretch to every horizon, a living, breathing entity that seemed to swallow all light and sound. There were no roads, no clearings, just endless layers of emerald canopy hiding whatever secrets lay beneath. When the wheels finally touched down on a narrow dirt strip carved from the jungle, the humidity hit him like a physical wall. The air felt thick enough to drink, heavy with the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers, and something else, something ancient and wild. The pilot, a grim-faced man who hadn't spoken beyond essential instructions, simply pointed toward a cluster of thatched roofs, barely visible through the trees before taking off again, leaving Leo standing alone with his crates of mysterious equipment. The local guides arrived an hour later, their expressions carefully neutral as they assessed the young foreigner with his university-branded backpack and obviously new hiking boots. Their leader, a man named Raphael, spoke broken English mixed with Portuguese as he examined the coordinates. This area, no good, he said, tapping the GPS. Spirits there, animals strange, people disappear. But the money, transferred from an anonymous account, spoke louder than superstition. The first day's trek felt like moving through a wet furnace. The jungle closed around them immediately, vines snatching at their packs, insects swarming any exposed skin. The advanced equipment began failing within hours. The satellite phone lost signal despite clear specs claiming global coverage. The LiDAR scanner malfunctioned in the humidity, and the climate-controlled containers struggled against the oppressive heat. Raphael and his team watched these failures with knowing looks, occasionally exchanging words in their native tongue that Leo didn't need to translate to understand. On the third day, they found the first anomaly: a standing stone half buried in the riverbank, carved with symbols that matched Leo's map exactly. The guides fell silent, making protective gestures as Leo carefully brushed away centuries of moss and dirt. The stone's placement felt intentional, like a marker pointing deeper into territory that even Raphael's people avoided. That night around the campfire, the guide spoke in hushed tones about the old ones and cities that sleep. Stories passed down through generations about a civilization that built with stone that shouldn't exist in this region. By the fifth day, the feeling of being watched had become constant. Not just by the howler monkeys in the canopy or the unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. Something else. A presence that seemed to study their progress with patient curiosity. The guides grew increasingly nervous, frequently checking their back trail and having rapid, tense conversations. Raphael finally stopped at a small clearing, his face grim. Tomorrow we reach the place your map shows. My people cannot go there. The stories say those who enter do not return the same. That night, lying in his hammock, listening to the jungle's symphony, Leo understood this was no longer an academic exercise. He was walking into something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. The morning brought a tension so thick you could feel it in the air itself. Raphael and his team prepared to leave before first light, their movements silent and efficient. They left Leo with enough supplies for 3 days, a hand-drawn map of the quickest route back to the river, and a final grave warning. The forest has memory, Raphael said, his usual pragmatic demeanor replaced by something more solemn. It remembers those who walk here, tread carefully, and do not take what is not offered. Then they were gone, melting into the green shadows without looking back. Leo was truly alone now. The jungle seemed to lean in closer, the sounds of wildlife taking on a different quality, more deliberate, almost observant. He checked the coordinates again, the GPS flickering weakly but still functional. He had less than 2 kilometers to go. The terrain grew stranger with every step. The familiar Amazonian flora began to give way to twisted, unfamiliar trees with bark that seemed to spiral unnaturally and vines that hung in perfect geometric patterns. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint, clean scent of stone that was utterly out of place in the humid rainforest. And then he saw it, a disturbance in the green wall ahead, a darkness that wasn't shadow. Pushing through a final curtain of hanging vines, he stopped dead. There, rising from the jungle floor as if the earth itself had decided to form architecture, was a massive stone archway. It was choked with centuries of vegetation, moss, and roots weaving through the masonry, but its lines were unmistakably deliberate. The stones were cut with a precision that spoke of advanced engineering, fitting together without mortar, yet leaving not even a hair's breadth of space between them. His hands trembled as he approached, brushing away thick layers of moss from one pillar. Beneath the green covering, the stone was smooth and cool to the touch, and there, carved with impossible clarity, were the symbols. The exact same hybrid script from the bunker map, etched into the archway's surface, as if made yesterday. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was no natural formation. This was built. This was real. He took samples, photographs, measurements, his academic training kicking in despite the sheer wonder of the moment. The archway stood nearly 5 meters tall, constructed from a type of granite not native to this region. As he worked his way around the structure, his boot caught on something half buried in the soft earth. Kneeling, he carefully dug around the object until he could pull it free. It was a ceremonial blade about the length of his forearm, made from a metal that shimmered with a strange blue-green iridescence. It felt impossibly light in his hand, the balance perfect. The blade showed no signs of corrosion despite clearly being ancient, and its edge was still sharp enough to slice through a vine with minimal pressure. The handle was carved with those same mysterious symbols, telling a story in a language he couldn't yet read. The metallurgy was all wrong. It resembled nothing from any known ancient civilization. This wasn't bronze, iron, or steel. It was something else entirely. He looked from the blade in his hand to the archway towering above him, then back at the dense jungle where his guides had retreated. They were right to be afraid. He was standing at the threshold of something that shouldn't exist, holding technology that defied historical understanding. The map had led him true. This was the first gateway, and he was about to walk through it alone. Beyond the archway, the ground sloped downward into what appeared to be a natural sinkhole. But as Leo descended, he realized the stone steps beneath the moss and soil were meticulously carved. The air temperature dropped significantly, carrying that distinct scent of ancient, dry stone. His headlamp beam cut through the darkness, revealing a vast tunnel system stretching into impossible blackness. The walls were smooth and precisely engineered, with a slight curvature that suggested advanced understanding of structural integrity. He ran his hand along the stone. Not a single crack or imperfection after what must have been centuries, maybe millennia. Ventilation shafts, cleverly disguised as natural fissures in the ceiling, allowed faint streams of light and fresh air to filter down. As he moved deeper, he noticed a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself, a steady, mechanical sound that shouldn't exist in a place this ancient. The tunnel branched into multiple directions, each passage marked with those same mysterious symbols carved above the archways. He began marking his path with biodegradable tape, his academic mind already cataloging the impossibility of it all. This was no primitive civilization. The engineering rivaled modern subway systems. His pack grew heavier with each new discovery. Carefully wrapped in protective cases were pottery shards with glazes that shimmered with embedded crystalline structures, stone tools that showed evidence of precision cutting beyond simple flint knapping, and several fragments of what appeared to be some kind of technology, smooth metallic components with intricate circuitry-like patterns that looked neither carved nor forged, but grown. None of it matched any known archaeological period. The artifacts felt both ancient and impossibly advanced, a contradiction that made his head spin. The mapping quickly became overwhelming. His GPS had failed completely the moment he stepped through the stone archway, and the tunnel system revealed itself to be a labyrinth of intersecting passages, chambers, and vertical shafts. His compass spun uselessly, suggesting strong magnetic anomalies. He resorted to traditional archaeological methods, sketching, measuring, leaving markers. But the scale was staggering. This wasn't a simple network. This was an entire underground city, with different tunnel sizes suggesting various purposes from transportation to water management to something he couldn't yet identify. By the third day underground, reality began to set in. His supplies were running dangerously low. The advanced water filtration system from his mysterious benefactor had clogged with strange mineral deposits, and his satellite phone remained completely dead, despite multiple attempts to find signal. The hum through the stones seemed to grow louder at times, almost rhythmic, as if the very mountain was breathing around him. He found himself speaking aloud just to hear a human voice, his words echoing down passages that might never have heard speech before. The weight of isolation pressed down as heavily as the stone above him. He was running out of time, out of supplies, and possibly out of sanity in this impossible place that shouldn't exist, but clearly did. The walls told stories in a language of shapes and numbers that defied everything Leo thought he knew about ancient communication. As he moved deeper into the tunnel system, the occasional symbols he'd seen near the entrance gave way to full panels of intricate inscriptions covering entire walls from floor to ceiling. The characters weren't merely decorative, they flowed in precise columns and rows, their arrangement suggesting mathematical precision rather than artistic expression. He'd try to photograph them, but his camera's lens couldn't capture the subtle depth of the carvings, the way certain symbols seemed to shift in the lamplight, as if holding multiple meanings within their forms. He spent hours tracing the patterns with his fingertips, feeling the perfect consistency of each stroke carved into stone that should have worn down centuries ago. Some symbols resembled celestial bodies, stars, planets, constellations, but arranged in configurations that didn't match any known astronomical records. Others looked like advanced mathematical notations, with geometric patterns that suggested calculations far beyond simple arithmetic. The most frustrating part was recognizing fragments of familiar ancient languages, a Sumerian numeral here, an Egyptian hieroglyph there, but integrated into a completely new system that made his academic training feel inadequate. The breakthrough came when he noticed the patterns repeating in specific sequences, particularly around doorways and ventilation shafts. He began documenting the symbols that appeared near water sources versus those near what seemed to be storage chambers, gradually building a crude classification system. The language appeared to be context dependent, with the same symbol meaning different things based on its position and accompanying marks. It was like trying to decode a musical score where each note changed meaning based on the instrument playing it. His moment of understanding arrived in the deepest chamber he'd found yet, where an entire wall was dedicated to what appeared to be astronomical calculations. There, carved with stunning precision, was a series of symbols he recognized from Babylonian mathematics, the base 60 numerical system used in ancient Mesopotamia. But these numbers were calculating planetary movements with an accuracy that shouldn't have been possible without telescopes. The realization struck him like lightning. This wasn't just a language. It was a complete scientific notation system capable of conveying complex data across millennia. They weren't writing stories. They were preserving knowledge in its purest form, and he was only beginning to understand how to read it. The tunnel opened so suddenly that Leo almost stumbled into the vast space beyond. His headlamp beam vanished into darkness, unable to find a ceiling or firewall. The air changed instantly, dry, cool, and carrying the scent of ozone and ancient stone. He stood at the edge of what could only be described as an underground cathedral carved from the living rock. The scale was staggering, large enough to hold several football fields with room to spare. His light caught the faint reflection of what might be water in the distance, a still black mirror stretching into the impossible dark. As his eyes adjusted, he began to see the patterns. Narrow shafts of sunlight pierced the darkness from above, perfectly aligned to strike specific points on the chamber floor. He checked his watch. The summer solstice had been 2 days ago. These weren't accidental fissures. They were engineered light channels designed to mark celestial events with precision that shouldn't exist in any ancient culture. The beams illuminated carved altars and measurement markers, creating a calendar of stone and light. Then he saw the artifacts. Dozens of them lay arranged in careful patterns around the central light points: tools, textiles, metal objects, all preserved in the perfectly stable environment. He approached the nearest collection with reverence, his boots whispering on stone that had been polished to a mirror finish. The tools showed no rust, the textiles retained their vibrant colors, the metal objects gleamed as if crafted yesterday. He picked up a weaving shuttle made from a wood he couldn't identify, its surface carved with intricate patterns that matched the wall inscriptions. The craftsmanship was flawless, each item speaking of a technology that blended art and function in ways that defied chronological placement. The architecture itself was the greatest marvel. The vaulted ceiling soared overhead, supported by columns that twisted in impossible spiral patterns without apparent structural logic, yet clearly bearing immense weight. The stone blocks fit together with such precision that he couldn't slip a piece of paper between them. There were no tool marks, no signs of construction, just perfect surfaces that seemed to have been formed rather than carved. The engineering principles at work were centuries ahead of anything in the archaeological record. Most telling of all was the evidence of sudden abandonment. A half-finished meal sat on a stone table, the organic material preserved by the dry air. Tools lay where they'd been dropped. A doorway stood partially carved, the chisel still resting against the stone, as if the worker would return any moment. Whatever happened here, it happened quickly, and nobody ever came back to retrieve their possessions. The civilization didn't gradually decline. It vanished in what must have been a single cataclysmic event, leaving this perfectly preserved snapshot of their daily lives frozen in time. The silence broke with a low, grinding sound that vibrated through the stone floor. From the far wall of the chamber, a massive door began to slide open, not outward, but sinking into the floor with impossible smoothness. Behind it stood another door, this one made of a strange metallic alloy that shimmered in Leo's headlamp beam. Its surface was covered in rotating rings of symbols, each band moving independently, and at its center glowed a series of crystals that pulsed with soft blue light. This wasn't just a door, it was a lock, a complex mechanical puzzle that had remained undisturbed for centuries, maybe millennia. Leo approached cautiously, his training warring with sheer wonder. The symbols on the rotating bands matched those he'd been studying. Celestial alignments combined with numerical sequences from that base 60 system. He noticed small depressions in the floor before the door, arranged in specific patterns. When he stepped on one, the corresponding symbol on the door glowed brighter. This was interactive. The civilization hadn't just built a lock, they'd built a test. His first attempt was cautious, aligning what he thought were solstice markers based on the chamber's light channels. The door emitted a low chime, and one of the crystals darkened. Wrong answer. His second attempt, using a sequence from the wall inscriptions, caused the entire mechanism to shudder, and a section of ceiling lowered slightly, a clear warning. This wasn't academic curiosity anymore. He was triggering security systems that had been dormant for ages. On his third attempt, combining astronomical symbols with the numerical sequence he'd decoded, something remarkable happened. The rings began moving on their own, aligning into configurations that shouldn't have been mechanically possible. The crystals pulsed in rhythm, creating patterns of light that danced across the chamber walls. He realized he wasn't just solving a puzzle, he was having a conversation with the builders across centuries. The final piece came when he noticed the light beams from above were striking specific symbols at that exact moment. He adjusted the rings to match the celestial alignment happening right now, in real time, and spoke the numerical sequence aloud in the pronunciation he'd reconstructed. The response was immediate and breathtaking. The crystals flared with brilliant blue light, the rings locked into perfect alignment, and the massive door slid silently into the floor. Beyond lay darkness even deeper than the chamber he stood in, and from that darkness came a rush of air that smelled of ozone and something else, something alive. The puzzle wasn't just solved, it had been waiting for someone who could read both the stars and the stones, someone who understood that true knowledge lives in the connection between heaven and earth. Leo stepped through the doorway, not knowing whether he'd passed a test or awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The air that greeted Leo was different here, dry, cool, and humming with a subtle energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. His headlamp revealed a circular chamber that seemed to drink the light, the walls made of the same impossible alloy as the door. In the center of the room, a massive crystal formation rose from the floor, its facets pulsing with a soft, internal luminescence. It wasn't a decorative feature. Geometric patterns of light shifted across its surface in patterns that mirrored the star maps he'd seen in the previous chamber. This wasn't just crystal. This was some kind of computational device, still active after all this time. Around the perimeter of the room, stone panels displayed what could only be described as astronomical mapping equipment. Rotating spheres showed planetary movements with impossible accuracy, tracking celestial bodies that hadn't been discovered until centuries after this civilization vanished. The precision was breathtaking. Each planet's orbit, axial tilt, and even gravitational interactions represented in stone and light. He reached out to touch one of the smaller orbs, and it responded to his touch, shifting to display a different celestial configuration. The interface felt intuitive, almost anticipating what he wanted to see. The humming he'd noticed grew stronger near the back wall, where a series of crystalline structures glowed with steady blue light. There were no wires, no power sources he could identify, just these geometrically perfect formations that seemed to draw energy from the earth itself. When he placed his hand near one, he felt a gentle warmth and a vibration that traveled up his arm. The energy system was still functioning, maintaining this chamber in perfect stasis while the jungle reclaimed everything above. His greatest discovery lay in alcoves along the eastern wall, dozens of thin, transparent sheets that felt like flexible glass. When he held one to the light, intricate patterns emerged, similar to the wall inscriptions but far more complex. These weren't mere records. They were data storage devices of some kind. He carefully placed one against the central crystal console, and to his astonishment, light patterns danced across its surface, resolving into what looked like chemical formulas or perhaps genetic sequences. The preservation was perfect, the information untouched by time. Each sheet contained knowledge that could take years to properly decode. Advanced mathematics, engineering principles, medical information that seemed centuries ahead of modern science. He was standing in the preserved intelligence of a civilization that had achieved wonders, all waiting patiently in the dark for someone who could understand what they had accomplished. The crystalline sheets came alive under the central console's glow, patterns resolving into something far beyond simple language. It wasn't a history written in words, but a story told through mathematics, astronomy, and genetic sequences that unfolded with terrifying clarity. This civilization hadn't merely predated known cultures. They'd existed when humanity was supposed to be struggling with basic agriculture. Their technology wasn't just advanced, it was based on principles modern science was only beginning to understand. They'd mastered quantum energy harvesting, genetic engineering that made our CRISPR technology look primitive, and astronomical knowledge that required understanding of cosmic phenomena we've only recently discovered. The revelation came in layers, each more staggering than the last. These weren't primitive people who'd stumbled upon advanced technology. They were scientists, philosophers, and artists who'd built a society around knowledge preservation. Their medical understanding included cellular regeneration techniques that could extend human lifespan dramatically. Their engineering allowed them to shape stone with vibrational frequencies rather than tools. Their astronomical maps showed planetary systems we haven't even identified with modern telescopes. The most humbling realization was that they'd achieved this not through external technology, but through understanding the fundamental connections between consciousness, energy, and matter. The Great Migration wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. The data showed they'd predicted a coming solar event that would devastate surface civilizations, a coronal mass ejection of unprecedented scale. Rather than try to survive it, they'd chosen to preserve their knowledge underground, creating these time capsule cities designed to wait out the catastrophe and eventually guide whatever civilizations rose afterward. Their philosophy was clear: knowledge must survive even if the people who created it did not. They saw themselves as custodians of understanding, not owners. The final piece fell into place when Leo found the migration patterns. There weren't just one or two hidden cities. There were dozens scattered across the globe, each containing different aspects of their knowledge, each waiting to be discovered when humanity reached the appropriate level of understanding. The map he'd found wasn't just directions to a single location. It was an invitation to join a conversation that had been ongoing for millennia. The civilization hadn't disappeared. They'd transformed, choosing to preserve their legacy in stone and light rather than risk it being lost to whatever catastrophe they'd foreseen. They'd built these places not for themselves, but for us, for whoever came next, for him. The final door didn't open. It dissolved. One moment there was solid stone etched with constellations Leo had come to recognize. The next, it simply vanished into shimmering particles that swirled like stardust before settling on the floor. The air that rushed out carried the scent of preserved papyrus, exotic resins, and something else. The clean, sharp smell of knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. His headlamp beam swept across a space so vast its edges disappeared into darkness, revealing row upon row of crystalline shelves that glowed with their own soft light. This wasn't a tomb filled with gold and jewels, though he could see those too, stacked neatly in alcoves as if they were the least valuable items here. The real treasure covered every surface. Thousands of the transparent data sheets he'd seen earlier, organized in meticulous patterns that suggested a classification system beyond his current understanding. There were artifacts that defied explanation, devices that looked like advanced medical instruments, communication devices, energy sources that hummed with quiet power. But the centerpiece was the library, shelf after shelf of preserved knowledge covering every imaginable field of study, all waiting patiently in the perfect preservation of this underground sanctuary. The gold and jewels were merely decoration compared to the wealth of understanding surrounding him. His satellite phone vibrated with an intensity that felt violent in the sacred silence. The screen glowed with a single word: connecting. Before a voice he'd never heard yet instantly recognized came through, crisp, professional, and utterly cold. Mr. Moretti, my employer is pleased with your progress. The extraction team will arrive at your coordinates in approximately 4 hours to secure the assets. Leo's blood ran cold. Extraction team. Assets. The words turned this sacred space into a commodity. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The benefactor who made this." "Possible," the voice replied smoothly. "The terms were clear. Absolute discretion. You have fulfilled your role admirably. Now step aside and let professionals handle the transition." The line went dead just as a new sound reached him, the distant but unmistakable thrum of helicopter rotors growing steadily closer. They weren't 4 hours away. They were already here. His mind raced through the implications. This wasn't about funding research. This was a corporate grab for technology and knowledge that could be weaponized or monopolized. He thought of the medical advancements that could cure diseases, the energy systems that could power nations cleanly, the historical truth that could rewrite human identity. Letting this fall into private hands wasn't just unethical. It was a betrayal of the civilization that had entrusted this knowledge to the future. The threat became explicit moments later when his phone buzzed with a new message containing a photograph taken through his dorm room window back home, followed by a list of every class his younger sister was enrolled in this semester. The accompanying text was simple: "Compliance ensures their safety. Resistance has consequences." The moral calculation shifted instantly from academic ethics to immediate physical danger. He could walk away with his family protected and likely receive a generous consulting fee that would solve all his financial problems forever. Or he could try to protect a discovery that belonged to all humanity, risking everything he loved in the process. The civilization beneath his feet had chosen preservation over profit, knowledge over power. Their entire legacy was a testament to what happened when you placed truth above self-interest. Now it was his turn to choose what kind of man, what kind of human he would be. The helicopter's roar grew deafening above the jungle canopy, rotor wash sending leaves and debris spiraling down through the trees. Leo's mind raced. 4 hours had become 4 minutes, and the extraction team wasn't here to politely discuss archaeological ethics. He grabbed the nearest data sheets, stuffing them into his waterproof case, along with the ceremonial blade and a few small artifacts that might serve as proof. The rest would have to stay, protected by the very security systems he'd spent days learning to navigate. He remembered the minor security triggers from the Guardian puzzle, the sections of ceiling that lowered, the hidden chambers that sealed. If he could reactivate those defenses. The central crystal console responded to his touch, the star maps shifting as he input the warning sequences he'd seen during his failed attempts. A deep grinding echoed through the chambers as stone barriers began sliding into place, sealing sections of the complex. He wasn't trying to keep them out permanently, just long enough to escape with what mattered most. The maze became his ally. He took routes that twisted back on themselves through narrow passages only wide enough for single file, past chambers where the floor dropped away into darkness. Behind him, he heard shouts of frustration as the corporate team encountered the reactivated security systems. Their high-tech equipment would be useless against stone doors that weighed tons and puzzles that required understanding rather than force. His supplies were dangerously low: half a liter of water, 2 protein bars, and a satellite phone that had finally found signal only to deliver threats. The jungle outside would be swarming with their team, the landing zone compromised. He needed an alternative exit, and the map showed one: a secondary tunnel system marked with water symbols that supposedly emerged at a river miles from here. The local guides found him at the tunnel junction, Raphael's face grim but determined in the dim light. "The forest told us you were in trouble," he said simply, handing Leo a water skin. "We do not abandon those who respect the old ways." Their return wasn't redemption. It was recognition that some things were more important than payment or safety. They moved quickly through passages the corporate team would never find, their knowledge of the land making sense of the ancient map's symbols. The narrow escape came at the river's edge, where the tunnel opened behind a thundering waterfall. As they emerged into the blinding sunlight, Leo saw the corporate helicopters circling like vultures over the wrong location. Raphael's men had canoes waiting, and they slipped into the current silently, the waterfall's roar covering their departure. Leo clutched the case containing fragments of a civilization that had chosen preservation over power, understanding that he was now part of that same story, the keeper of truths too important to be owned. The journey back felt like moving through a dream, every step heavy with the weight of what he carried and what he'd left behind. The case in his pack, containing a handful of crystalline data sheets, the ceremonial blade, and a few small artifacts, felt impossibly light for its significance. Raphael and his team moved with purpose, their knowledge of the river systems and hidden trails making the return trip swifter, though no less tense. They avoided established routes, sticking to tributaries too narrow for motorboats and paths known only to the oldest members of their community. Each distant engine noise or unfamiliar bird call made them freeze, listening before pushing onward. When they finally reached the remote airstrip days later, the same grim-faced pilot was waiting, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Leo's battered appearance and the serious faces of the guides, but asked no questions. The flight out was silent, the hum of the engine a stark contrast to the jungle's cacophony. Leo watched the endless green canopy shrink below, holding the case on his lap, his mind already rehearsing the impossible story he had to tell. Back on campus, the reality of his situation crashed down immediately. Professor Evans cornered him outside the archaeology department, his face a mask of smug disapproval. "Finally decided to return from your unauthorized absence, Moretti. The review board is waiting. I trust you have something more substantial than more wild theories to explain your negligence." The other students glanced away awkwardly, already writing him off. He looked like a man who'd been sleeping rough for weeks, which he had, and smelled like it too. His financial aid package had been suspended due to missed deadlines, and a final notice from the housing office was taped to his dorm room door. The corporate threat felt distant here, replaced by the immediate, crushing pressure of academic and financial failure. He had proof of the most significant archaeological find in a century in his backpack, and yet he was moments from being kicked out of school with nowhere to go. His first attempt to share the discovery was a disaster. He arranged a meeting with the department head, Dr. Aris, and a few senior faculty. He laid the artifacts on the conference table with reverence. The blade, with its impossible metal, the data sheets that shimmered in the fluorescent light, photographs of the inscriptions and the control center. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Professor Evans snorted. "A clever forgery, Moretti, par for the course, amateur theatrics and likely stolen artifacts. Where did you really go for 3 weeks? And what did you pawn to buy this theater prop?" Dr. Aris, a kind but weary woman, examined the blade with a magnifier. "The metallurgy is unusual, but Leo, without context, without a documented site, this could be anything. A modern art project, a hoax." The dismissal was polite but final. They saw a desperate student, not a discoverer. The corporate team hadn't needed to discredit him. He'd already done that himself by being broke, behind on his work, and utterly unbelievable. The media attention, when it came, was not the kind he wanted. An anonymous tip, undoubtedly from his benefactor, led a sensationalist news blog to run a story titled "Failed Student Claims Discovery of Lost Atlantis" in Amazon. It was ridiculing, painting him as a delusioned dropout. The comments were brutal. He became a punchline overnight. Meanwhile, a sleek, corporate-backed foundation issued a press release announcing the discovery of significant historical artifacts in a remote region, carefully omitting any specific location or details, positioning themselves as the legitimate authorities. They were stealing his discovery in plain sight, using his lack of credibility as their shield. The turning point came from an unexpected corner. Dr. Aris, despite her skepticism, had sent a tiny sliver of the blade's metal for analysis to a materials science lab at a different university, more out of due diligence than belief. The results came back a week later. She called Leo into her office. Her demeanor completely changed. The report stated the alloy was unlike any known on Earth, with a crystalline structure and elemental composition that defied modern metallurgy. It was genuine. It was impossible. It was real. She looked at him, not with pity, but with dawning, terrified awe. "My God, Leo," she whispered, "what have you found?" The scientific verification process was slow, meticulous, and conducted in absolute secrecy this time. Under Dr. Aris's protection, Leo's academic suspension was quietly lifted. The department secured a discreet grant, not from his mysterious benefactors, but from a consortium of universities with strict ethical codes. Specialists in archaeometallurgy, linguistics, and geophysics were brought in, one by one, each required to sign crushing non-disclosure agreements. They worked in a secure lab, far from the prying eyes of the main campus. The data sheets, under specific light frequencies, revealed layers of information that stunned every expert who saw them. The language began to be decoded, not as a history, but as a scientific database of breathtaking scope. The verification wasn't about proving it was old. It was about struggling to comprehend how it could possibly exist. With verification came a cautious, managed release of information to the global archaeological community. It started with a peer-reviewed paper on the unique metallurgy of the blade, published in a prestigious journal. Then another on the linguistic patterns of the numerical system. The corporate foundation that had tried to claim the discovery found itself outmaneuvered by rigorous, undeniable science. Their smear campaign against Leo collapsed under the weight of evidence. Offers began to flood in: publishing deals, speaking engagements, consulting fees from every major museum and research institution in the world. Leo, guided by Dr. Aries and a team of lawyers, carefully managed it all. He established a trust to handle the proceeds from book and film rights, ensuring the money would fund not just his future, but decades of continued research at the site. The personal transformation was slower, deeper. The constant knot of anxiety in his stomach, the fear of eviction and failure, began to loosen its grip. He paid off his mother's mortgage first. The phone call telling her she never had to worry about money again was a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy he would cherish forever. The generational chain of financial struggle was broken. He could finish his degree not as a desperate student on the brink, but as a respected researcher with a guaranteed future. He moved out of the dorm into a small apartment, and the first time he bought groceries without calculating the total down to the penny. He stood in the checkout line and nearly cried. He now leads the international research team studying the findings, coordinating experts from a dozen disciplines. The site is protected, the entrance concealed better than before. Its location, a closely guarded secret within the scientific community. The work will take lifetimes. The corporate threat has receded, their claims rendered illegitimate by the overwhelming authenticity of the discovery. Leo is no longer Leo the broke student. He is Dr. Moretti, the man who found the impossible. But in the quiet moments, he's still the same person who first brushed the dust from that vellum map, driven then and now by a simple, powerful need: to understand. He stood at the front of the lecture hall where he'd once nearly failed, looking out at a new generation of students. The map fragment was now displayed behind protective glass, a humble piece of vellum that had unlocked everything. He still kept one secret close. The final panel of the map showed not one, but two lost cities. One had been found. The other remains hidden, its location known only to him, waiting for the right time to be revealed. The real discovery wasn't the ancient technology or the rewritten history. It was realizing that sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't gold or glory, but the chance to change your story entirely. To go from someone who was barely surviving to someone who could truly live. If you've ever wondered what secrets might be waiting just beneath the surface of your own world, hit subscribe. Because the story isn't over yet. There's still one more city to find.